So good morning, and thank you very much to everybody for making time again to focus on the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force and working through the recommendations. And I will go ahead and do a screen share of our agenda just to make sure we are all on the same page. Okay, hopefully that is visible on your screen. So we have the next hour and a half set aside to continue to review and scrub those ASDSO recommendations, and also to allow time for any new recommendations that that you have identified that are not currently covered in the ASDSO recommendations. And then we'll take a little bit of time to wrap up where we're at, and I have a little bit of business to share with you in preparation for the full task force meeting, which will be Monday, next Monday after Thanksgiving. Then we'll wrap up. Are there any questions or comments about the agenda this morning? I guess if you do, I'd just ask you to unmute because I can't see everybody on my screen right now. Okay, hearing none. Just stop that share. Make sure there's nobody waiting to join. Nope. Okay, great. So last time we had worked through a number of the recommendations for the permitting and design review subgroup, and I will bring that screen up of the recommendations with resources. We did talk through almost all of them, all of the permitting ones. We had some work to do yet on getting through all of the design review. So I guess there are two different ways we could do this. One would be to go back to the ones that we discussed last time, and that still, have some work to do based on email correspondence that was happening in between the meetings. Or we could pick up where we left off with the design review, which was 2020-10-B. So is there a preference for if we want to kind of backtrack and work through those, or continue with our list from last time?
Elizabeth, knowing that this is the last breakout session for us, I'd like us to all consider a strategy to make sure that we complete everything that we're supposed to and be ready for the next Monday meeting. So if the two new items in the design haven't been discussed yet, maybe we try to hit those first, as maybe they'll take the most time, and then circle back on any loose ends, and hopefully just ensuring that we're, that takes less time maybe, and ensuring that we get all of it done.
I appreciate that, Glenn. I will say right now, the way that we're, the draft agenda for the meeting on the 30th is an opportunity for all of the task force members to get a feeling for what's been happening in the subgroups that they haven't been a part of, as well as for each group to report out. So just a little preview, and again, this isn't final, but an approach that we're looking at would be that over the course of probably about half an hour, let me think here, that we would give each subgroup about 5 minutes to do a high-level report out. And this is just a preview. I'm going to be looking for one of you to be a spokesperson for this group. So we're looking for someone to do just answer about 3 to 5 questions about what happened in the subgroup to give everybody a flavor for it, because we recognize certainly everybody's interested in other subgroups that you haven't been in these subgroup work sessions. So to Glenn's suggestion, is everybody fine then with jumping into the 2 remaining design review recommendations that we haven't discussed yet?
Yes.
Yes. Let's go for it.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so then if everyone can see this on the screen, 10B, ASDSO is recommending requiring owners of proposed projects that are of a complex nature to provide an independent board of review to affirm the owner's design. Let me just fix this formatting so you can see all of this. So when we spoke last time, there was a proposal to change the wording here, rather than to say to provide, rather to fund, because that was the issue here.
I didn't, was it to fund? I mean, I thought it was just to provide an independent review. In the sense, is it coming from the state? Is the state doing the review, or is it the designer doing the review?
Yeah, Paul, I had a similar question on this too, where I was not quite understanding the different parties involved in this. You know, like for example, like a complex project. I'm guessing, like, is that an assumption that it's being designed by a professional engineer, and that doesn't constitute the independent review, I'm assuming. So who is performing the review, and I guess I just lacked a little clarity on this item.
Sure, maybe I can provide some perspective. This recommendation is for like very complex reviews on very complex projects. Think, you know, construction of a dam, removal of a dam, you know, or a large scale rehabilitation project that involves multiple disciplines. So I think this is kind of complementary to another set of recommendations that was more to the point of, if the state dam safety program doesn't have the in-house expertise to perform all aspects of that review, they could, one option would be to contract that out to a consultant. So the state, the DSP would have to have funding, you know, and resources available to do that. Another option is this, where, and I think this is kind of similar to the FERC process, where the design engineer designs it, and then the owner pays for an independent review of that design by an outside firm. So, like I said, I don't know. I think this is kind of one of the suite of strategies to help the dam safety program be able to review very complex designs.
And I guess I would kind of make this corollary to, or suggest that this is somewhat corollary to a lot of different municipalities, governmental agencies around the state. I know particularly like county drain commissions, that on complex projects, they have, you know, ongoing contracts with consultants that provide detailed engineering analyses when projects come in, and then they bill the owner, basically, yeah, the owner. So if it's I'm thinking a development that's impacting a drain or something like that, you know, they'll bill the owner to review or to have that third party review. So I'm assuming something along those lines.
So from my notes, I thought we were having this debate on who actually does that review work, though. Are we telling the owner that they have to get an independent review done and send it to us? Or would Eagle use their own as needed consultant that they would fund. It seemed like we weren't settled on that last time we talked.
Well, and it's the way it's written is a bit confusing because it says the owner is to provide an independent review board. And when you say board, that to me sounds like it's coming out of the agency. You know, so if the owner is providing it, then that's just going to be a consultant. But a board is something that the agency puts together. Like you have this, the agency has this suite of people they're going to go to make these reviews happen. So maybe that's what it comes down to. Is this going to be an unfunded mandate, or is it going to be something that the agency is going to just do, and we're going to get funding for the agency to take care of this where they see fit?
So I think that there was a recommendation for the agency to have like standing contracts with engineering firms that could provide this expertise. This one is this would be owner funded, like, and so they hire their design engineer, they complete the design, and then maybe it would be panel or group or whatever. I think they put a word in there to say this isn't just hire one additional engineer. This would be an engineering panel with enough expertise to review all aspects of the design, basically certify that the design is appropriate, and then it would get passed to the state for permitting review. So I think that's the two things that are in front of us right now from ASDSO is one or the other or both, I guess, and it would pertain to those very complex projects only.
Yeah, and I apologize. I was looking at the recommendation that's captured on screen in the spreadsheet. It's stated the recommendation of changing the word provide to fund.
Well, maybe what it should be, Dan, is change board of to independent engineer to review. Independent engineer to instead of board of, it should be engineer to. So I guess that's what's confusing me is the word board.
Yeah, I agree, Paul. It almost seems that it's suggesting that the intent would be to suggest a review by an independent board. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, a board sounds to me like what this group here is, it's sort of this panel that is put together, sort of a committee ad hoc sort of group. But you say an independent engineer, that means you're going to hire somebody and they're going to be hired for that specific task and they're going to review a specific thing. They're not going to be waiting around to pick up projects as they come along. It's going to be project specific.
So
Hey,
Paul,
quick question. When a company consultant designs a complex dam, and I'm not sure what you mean by complex, and I also don't mean if you mean high risk or otherwise, but most companies do peer review for the liability insurance. What would be the difference?
Well, the difference in the sense.
I mean, for liability insurance, most companies follow a peer review process anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the insurance requires, but anymore for a company to accept the risk internally, the executive board of the company is going to ask that you include on your project some kind of review, independent review, and that would be internally though. But and you could further stipulate, I guess, that to do that you would hire another company that would even make you more robust, I guess you would say. But I'm not sure if that's going to be specified in the insurance. It'll be probably more when you're in the contract language.
Luke, did you have something to add to that?
I was gonna say, for Paul and Glenn, you guys work with FERC probably closer than we do. I know that when you own and operate a hydro dam, you're required to have the owner's dam safety program, which is, with the chief dam safety engineer and the dam safety program defined for FERC. But it's my understanding too that there's this, and I don't know if it's for all cases, but in certain cases, the language they use is appoint a board of review. You know, this independent board of review. So it's outside of your owner's dam safety program, and typically is a different consultant, maybe academia folks, folk from professors and stuff from academia or whatever, but they have to be on your board of review. So if you submit a work plan for a modification to a dam that crosses a certain threshold, not only does your the owner's dam safety program have to sign off on it, but your panel, your review panel, your board of review has to review it. And so I think that's kind of the model. So maybe that clears up some of the language for you.
Okay.
This is kind of mirroring the FERC process where it's a very in-depth review. The licensee or the owner is required to have the separate independent panel review the designer's review plans and specs, and then they get passed on to FERC for their final review. So
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that requirement enough to be able to say one way or the other, Luke. But
So,
you know,
yeah, Paul, and Luke, hopefully I'm not showing my ignorance in this topic. But this term board might be confusing Paul and I a bit. The only independent reviews that I participate in as a dam owner working with FERC is that we will often need to share our designs with the independent consultant that was hired, for a period of essentially 5 years, or every 5 years, to do this Part 12 inspection. They represent the independent eye and the independent viewpoint, and occasionally FERC will ask, well, what does your independent consultant say about this project or this topic or this safety issue, and we'll have to seek their input. There is not a board per se. They're typically, this independent consultant is represented by one individual who is hired in that role. And the remainder of the reviews all really originate from FERC senior staff themselves, and it's a consistent group of people, maybe like 4 individuals, senior individuals at FERC, who are providing technical review comments and questions to us. So it's through this whole team of FERC senior engineers, myself as the dam owner, my hired professional engineer, and then this independent consultant. And that is like the makeup of the team that, reviews and addresses highly complex or technical issues with any project of ours.
Okay, that makes sense. I know that the Boise Hydro Dams had an independent board. It's called the board because it was consisted of more than one person, right? So, but yeah, I think, if you guys want to adopt this or modify it, I think Paul's suggestion clears up the language to provide an independent consultant or engineer's review, and it's implied that engineer, if he doesn't have expertise in all the areas of the design, they'll have a team, right? So independent engineering team or something like that. I think they put board to indicate that it's typically more than one person. If one person can review it, then it's probably not the most complex design. Not, you know what I mean? So if you don't need a geotech, a structural, hydraulics, etc., it probably indicates that the project isn't that complex, right? So.
I think what we're getting at, though, is just that there is an independent engineering review done, not necessarily by a board. You mentioned that there was a board for Boise Hydro. Who set that board up? Did they do that, or is that something the state did?
No, because this was when it was under FERC. So FERC required them to basically declare that this is their independent team who will review all complex designs, and then they submit resumes and get basically pre-approved. So similar to the Part 12D inspection process where you get your independent consultant approved. It's similar. There was a board set up for this one. So, but anyway, that's
Luke, were they members of the same company or different companies consisting that board?
I'd have to look back. I think it was folks from different areas like academia and consulting.
If I could make a suggestion, instead of engineering team or board of review, I think it might make sense to instead, call them independent experts, with the S being in parentheses. Depending on the project, it may just be an individual. It could end up being a team, but that way, we're looking for independent experts to affirm, to review and affirm the owner's design. So then the next question is whether the owner provides them or the owner funds them and the state, has them under contract.
Hey, Dan, just a quick question. The way I read this is for proposed new dams, not existing dams. Is this correct, or?
No, this is complex projects. So this could be an existing dam that has a major rehabilitation. So think of major spillway replacements and, or core replacements or, anything like that.
So could a low risk in terms of hazard, low, significant, high, would they all fall under this if they're complex?
My expectation is, just inherent with the term complex is you're probably looking at high and significant hazard. I would anticipate it would be very unlikely that a low hazard dam would fall into this category.
Well, what about the mine tailings dam?
Those are generally all high hazard dams.
Okay.
I just want to be mindful of the time. It is now almost 11:25. So we just want to remember that unfortunately, we have to keep, moving along pretty quickly. I did put a question in the chat. If you could take a moment to look at that, task force members, and reply, that would help us with knowing how to spend our time this morning. Okay, so I've, as you can see, I've edited this recommendation based on what Dan had just offered. Is there also a need to change the language as was discussed at the previous meeting? In terms
I think
of
that kind of goes away then, I think. Seems to me. I mean, if it's something that the state is going to have on board all the time, it seems to me that you're just going to charge a fee to the owner, right? That means your permit fee is going to go up to however many $1,000 more to make your reviews, right?
Yeah, and for that, I guess I'm going to ask, Luke and Amy, who have more experience in this. I could see this getting really convoluted in terms of our permit fees, of having to utilize a panel of experts for projects, whether it's, there's one complexity that needs review versus, multiple facets that need additional support. This could be a very variable target, not to mention, just, the inflammation, inflation and, changes in consultant fees, that's going to play a role too. I mean, how do you guys feel like this is something easier for the owner to simply?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's, I think, because then it's going to take away that issue of being, how it's clunky for you guys to change your fees and all that. I mean, I think I would just recommend we affirm it as Elizabeth has revised it there and get rid of that other comment about provide or fund. That'd be my suggestion,
Paul, how could the state then guarantee the quality of, some quality assurance of this so-called labeled expert?
Glenn, that's a good point. And the little experience I have with FERC, they have a prior approved independent consultant list. And in some projects, that consultant list is up to 100 people, but that have been vetted through that process. And that's one option you might be alluding to, kind of that quality control.
Right, right.
So what are you thinking, Glenn? I mean, are you thinking that this is just something that gets funded directly out of Eagle's budget and it's not going to appear in fees on the permit, and that they're just going to have their people on board, and when Eagle sees a need to do an independent review, they're going to call up X, Y, or Z and say, we want you to come in on this project and we're going to give you this budget and you're going to review this design?
I mean, I feel like that puts the state at a pretty big disadvantage from a fund standpoint, you know, not to mention, depending on the complexity, the projects are going to be so varied, and the complexity on one could just be, let's just call it just very significant. And why should the state be put in a position where they have to fund all of that without the owner being responsible? You know, after all, it's the owner's project. So I kind of like the idea that everyone's suggesting, is that it's the owner's responsibility to fund it, and we just need to provide some path of you know, state approved expert or something, you know, like this list that FERC has of people who have been vetted and pre-approved as dam experts, you know, something like that.
I'm fine with that.
I mean, a lot of times it's even on a case-by-case basis, where like for FERC, for example, you know, the process there is you submit someone's resume and they actually get reviewed and vetted and independently approved for that task.
Yeah, and you know, the budget on this is going to really end up back at the owner anyway, because the owner is going to hire the engineer, and the engineer is going to have their design fee, and then you can just make an estimate of some percentage of that design fee. In this case, is going to have to go to this independent consultant, you know, whether it's say 5% or whatever it is of your design fee, you know, so then it kind of ties it tightly to the actual project in that sense.
Just as a suggestion, do you want to just add that after experts, comma, to be approved by the DSP, you know, provide an independent experts, comma, to be approved, comma, to affirm the design, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that gets to the point where we have to sign off that these are our experts.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
And did I hear to be approved just as is, or to be approved by
the
Dam Safety Program?
By the DSP, Dam Safety Program.
Yeah.
So Lucas, would you guys come up with your own pre-qualification list, or would you just use FERC's?
We'd probably look at FERC's maybe to start with. We, you know, would probably start to develop, you know, a pre-qualification process internally for us, but then, you know, over time that portfolio is going to evolve and grow.
Great.
I don't know along that line exactly. I don't know if it's appropriate somewhere to just mention that qualifications would need to be developed at some point as part of this whole recommendation, just because that is an effort that will need to take place.
Yeah, that might, even as part of this recommendation, that might be something to include, that the DSP will need to develop qualifications for experts.
Dan, one quick question. Do you see any problem defining a complex dam? What is complex?
That's something that, yes, we're going to need to define what that is. I mean, the first thought that comes to my mind off the bat, honestly, is, where it extends beyond our capabilities of really doing adequate review. And, to that extent, from a H&H standpoint, 3D hydraulic modeling is not something that we have the capabilities of even reviewing internally right now. And so, or CFD models. So, that certainly gets to a point beyond our capabilities. Similarly, if, as we start getting into, finite element models, and structural and geotechnical, we don't have those capabilities either. So, things like that certainly, cross that realm. But that, I agree with you. That's something that we need. As this recommendation were to move forward, we would need to develop those criteria.
Dan, I'm not sure this offers any more clarity, but what if instead of, or in addition to complex, it was qualified by saying something that had a direct impact on dam safety and/or stability?
That was the other direction I was thinking as well, and the risk associated with the project, both in terms of a hazard classification as well as just overall risk to the project, like you say, due to structural stability or occasionally even hydraulics comes into play.
So was there a suggestion there to edit this language?
I think, kind of along with that asterisk where I think somewhere else in the spreadsheet you put, developing qualified list. We need to develop the criteria for complex project.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. In the interest of time, I suggest that we move on then to this next one, which I think is pretty straightforward, but we'll see. We'll see what you all think. So this was the Dam Safety Program staff noted that this would be pretty minimal staffing needed to do this of 0.1 FTE. This is to develop a standard format Dam Safety Program engineering report for, you can read it, for dams in Michigan to be completed by the reviewing dam safety engineer. So is this something that the task force members would be ready to adopt in its current form, or is there discussion on potential revisions?
Just for some perspective, this is for our internal reviews, kind of like a checklist, right? Like we call them project review reports, and we have them for pretty much everything else that we do. So this would just be to formalize a standard project review report for all permits that come in to the Dam Safety Program, so that we're filling out the same form basically when we're reviewing these, like a checklist.
I'd say adopt as is.
Agreed, adopt.
Luke, this is checklist to review designs, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. When we're reviewing a permit application for repair, modification, etc., typically in-house we have a project review report that we attach to the file that says we looked at X, Y, and Z, and these were the comments. And so it'll just be to develop that for dam safety.
Great. Okay, excellent. I'm going to just scroll back up here then to the permitting section. So before we revisit these recommendations, I think it was primarily B and C of 09B, 09C, I just wanted to check in again about if there are any new recommendations beyond the conversation around 9B and 9C that have been happening over email. And I think we're probably going to need to bring the state staff up to speed on those for our discussion. But at this point, it looks like there are none of you are planning to introduce new recommendations in this permitting and design review category. Is that correct? Because that will affect, how we spend our time.
Correct.
Okay, great. That gives us a little more breathing room then for talking about these existing recommendations. Could I suggest that Well, okay, so what we had done at our last meeting as a subgroup, as indicated in column D, is that we had Paul looking at 9B, and then also a subgroup of Stan and Paul and Brad and Marty, who were taking a closer look at 9C to propose some new language. So I'm going to turn this over to them to just kind of characterize how, what that thread of conversation has been like, and bring the dam safety program staff up to speed.
Did you want me to cover part B first? Because I don't think that the others were involved in that.
Thanks, Paul. I think that makes sense. Let's start with 9B.
Okay. So I just went through and made some suggested revisions to the statute and rule on this. And I'm not sure, did you send that B around, Elizabeth? I saw the C come, but I didn't see the B.
Okay, let me take a look. I can do a screen share of that.
Pull up, or yeah, if you want to do that.
Or if you have it handy.
Yeah, I've got it up here. Am I
Okay,
allowed
let
to
me
do a
stop
screen share?
sharing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let me see
go
if I
ahead.
can make this work.
Perfect.
Okay. I don't know if everybody sees that.
Yes, yeah, I see.
Yes.
We see
Okay.
it.
So the 9B, the way it was written, we seem to be steering toward these rule changes in 1310 and 1311. And 1310 and 1311 talk about inspection reports and what you do under certain different dam classifications. And I guess I thought, the gist of this thing is to talk about risk creep that happens over time downstream, particularly of dams. So in my opinion, this thing really should have steered back to 13, 15, 18, which is the statute talking about hazard classification where it's first brought up. And I can get everybody a copy of this document, but what it does here is it puts a point in here about the department shall notify the owner of the classification and the effective date of the current classification and classification history. So there should be a classification history on the dams. And then here it says within 30 days, the department from the notification, the owner is supposed to communicate to the department how those requirements of that classification are going to be met. And in particular, spillway capacity, EAP, and inundation mapping requirements and inspection schedule. Those are the main areas that are impacted by that hazard potential. So I don't think those sections need to be necessarily touched at all, because they already talk about what you do under the given classification, but you need to, I think we want to try to steer people better to thinking about that classification. So that was my suggestion here, to add a little language up in paragraph 2. And then down below, when we get into the bit here about the inspection reports, there is a notice in there about inspecting or about mentioning the hazard potential. But here I'm suggesting that the assessment of the appropriateness of the current department hazard potential in view of current conditions be looked at. So we're sort of signaling to the owner that they should be aware of, what's happening at the dam now, and then the assessment should be considering damages or potential damages related to the different classifications that may have changed. And putting that date in there, I think, is important too, where that if that date of that last classification rides along with it, then the owner will have that number more in mind and think, well, okay, I can go to Google Earth Pro and, scale back, do something simple as, go back 10 years, for example, on an earlier aerial flyover and see what it looked like downstream of my dam. And, oh, look, there's a new development that is moved in there. that I hadn't really considered. So just that's really the gist of this thing here. And then in inspection reports 1310, I do say here under, because it does ask for that hazard potential classification, you're supposed to comment on it, but here I'm saying, let's mention the date of the current classification, the classification history again, and then under B4, adding a little bit of language there to say that you're going to look at the potential classification in view of current conditions related to damage potentially caused by the dam, and get rid of this if appropriate line in there. So that's sort of how I was thinking on this, is I think that steers us a little better toward, in my opinion, what this really is getting at. So there, that's so much for number B.
Paul, thanks for going through that. Everyone, I did just email this to all of you. Sorry, I had unintentionally omitted that from yesterday's email.
And I guess I could do the same for, go ahead, yeah.
How's that? I'll jump in and say, obviously, this is really up to the task force member. I'll say that I like this, what you've proposed, Paul, and nice work. But does this cause us to change any of the language in the recommendation? Elizabeth?
I'm sorry, Dan, can you say that again?
I like this, and I'm assuming this will be something that we would provide as part of an appendix. The specific language or statute language. But I'm curious, does this change the recommendation? Anything that we see here, does it change the recommendation that we have?
I think it does, Dan, because look what it says there. It says development of requirements for the dam owner of significant or low hazard dams. Should that be high? To address the potential change in hazard classification and related changes to the dam that will be required as a result. It's not as a result of the change in hazard where I think we need to beef it up. It's getting them to consider that there might be a change in hazard classification, or that it should be, because the state is asking you're asking the owner to consider that in their report. If Eagle comes along and changes the classification, then what you need to do is fairly clear. It's in there. I mean, you just have to go look at those sections and, okay, under, EAP, I've got to do this. Under spillway potential, now I'm up in this range, But I thought that to me, this seems really to be getting those owners of the lower hazard, or maybe it should be low hazard, because you're trying to get them to consider if they're increasing to significant or high. So I guess that is correct, but you're trying to get them to consider that they may have to change. So that's, to me, where the wording on this is a little off, unless I'm totally missing the point here, which is possible.
No, I think you're right, Paul, there. I mean, I think what I had in mind was kind of use this recommendation to expand on what's in the rules, where it says, the inspection report must, contain the recommendations for further evaluations and including the appropriateness of the current hazard potential. So in that thing, they should be looking at, hazard potential and notifying the department that, hey, this used to be a low, but now there's a development. Ultimately, we will make the determination, but under the current structure, the data needed to make that determination comes from the owner. So
right.
Any dam breach analysis or whatever, if the dam breach analysis is already done and the boundaries of the map are there, and all of a sudden there's a new develop within that boundary, it's pretty easy determination. But, if you're just looking at aerial review and you say in the area downstream of a dam, we don't know anything about elevation there, so we don't know if that's in the flood area or not. So yeah, I think you're on the right track. But yeah, I think that was my thought, was that we need to maybe beef up that requirements of what things they need to be looking at and what need to be the notification requirements if there is notification and follow-up if there is a change in hazard potential classification.
How about this as a change of that language? Low, to address the potential change in the change in risk that might result in a hazard classification change. You know, you want the owner to look at the risk that is going to cause you to change the hazard classification. You know, the owner should be looking at the risks that are out there. That's what we want them to pay attention to. What risk has changed since you last classified the dam? And instead of talking about to address the change in hazard potential classification.
Well, I think I actually, the more I'm looking at this, I actually don't mind the way the text is written for the recommendation. I think what you've provided is actually, very appropriate. The one key piece that really is making a significant change is the requirement of an owner to provide a plan. You added text that is requiring the owner to provide a plan after they've been notified. So I think the rule change that or the statute change that you've provided is really good. I think that does reflect what is here in the recommendation, because it really is, it's addressing the change in hazard classification, and what really results is the changes to the dam or its operation, as you mentioned, spillway capacity, EAP, inundation mapping requirements, things like that. That is the change, and that's where the plan comes into place.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I guess what's throwing me off here, though, Dan, is in that column F, we say rule change 1310 and 1311. 1311 is EAP, and there, that's already covered in there, what you do for the different classifications, and so if if you're going to do that, if you're going to do 1311, then you should also put in the section about spillway capacity, right? Because now you're talking about, but I don't think you need to do that. It's already, so the rule change in 1310 is there, to me, it's just trying to send a stronger signal, in view of the dam safety report that the owner is required to do. You're trying to send them a stronger signal that, hey, when you're doing your safety reports, we really want you to take this seriously as far as what your scope creep or your risk creep might be.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what it's saying in the root of the recommendation in C. And I think what you've provided addresses that, provides more distinct language to that.
Yep, I would just piggyback and say the rule change to 1310 and 11, those, I guess, those were, that came from me. And I thought maybe we'd look at it. So 1310 has the section about the inspection report must contain the evaluation of hazard potential, and then if any necessary changes are. 1311 would then be as a placeholder to think, do we need to include any language, if the hazard creep happens and the hazard potential changes from significant to high, or even, from high to higher, the EAP would have to be, updated to include, updated mapping, updated list of occupied dwellings, etc., that would be identified that the risk has increased since the EAP was developed. So, but I mean, I don't know if the current authority already covers it. Maybe a change isn't necessary, but that was my thinking when I put those in, was, does it expand to affect these? And you're perfectly correct. If you go from a low to a significant, now the design flood changes and the requirement, if an EAP is required, changes. And I think that's already covered in the law because, there are hazard potential.
Right. So. Okay. Well, how about this, Dan? Development of requirements for the dam owner of significant or low hazard dams to evaluate changes in risk and to address the potential. So just adding a little line in there, to evaluate changes in risk and to address the potential change in hazard classification and the related changes the dam will be.
Elizabeth, could you go back to the recommendation? Is that okay for everybody, or do people want to leave the screen on?
Do you want me to take this off here? Let me stop sharing
Okay.
because everybody's got that document now.
Yep. Okay. Yes, I will share that. Okay. Is that visible?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. I was just working on the development of requirements. I think to evaluate changes in risk and is new language. So that was what I think Paul just suggested.
I'm fine with that, personally. It's not my call, but I'll just throw it out there.
Who said that? Sorry, was that Marty?
No, that was
Supportive as well.
Oh,
Dan and Marty are both supportive, as is Luke.
Thanks, Luke.
As is Brad.
okay. Okay. Hearing no opposition, adopt with revisions. Okay, great. Let me save that. And then moving on to related 9C. So then we had our subgroup who had some conversation on this. And
Did you guys want me to go through this one too then, Marty and Stan?
Yeah, that'd be good. You
Okay.
want to use my email or what? I mean, however you want to do it's fine.
I got that available here. If I need, we'll pull that up. Let me see. So this one, should I do a share screen again?
Well, I guess.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess you can share it. The one thing I guess I want to clarify on here between what you had provided in your PDF, Paul, versus the recommendation. The recommendation is really getting to permitting, or another way of looking at it, licensing the operation of a dam, versus I think what your PDF, what you sent over for the rule change, is simply requiring review of operation and maintenance plans. Is that correct?
Well, it's requiring to have one,
Right.
which I don't think is required now. I mean, it says in the statute and in the rule that those things are to be looked at as part of the inspection report process, but it doesn't, there's nowhere that I'm aware of that it says you even have to have it at all. It's just whatever it happens to be, it needs to be reviewed, you know. It could be just an unwritten plan that they follow, or just the engineer's judgment of how does this thing look like they're operating it. That they seem to be doing a good job. So that was my point, is that requiring a written O&M to me is sort of that gives you that standing document that would be there in lieu of having this operator permit, and that standing document, that's what you're assessing your maintenance section of your rule, right? Because in there you got a couple clauses about checking the operation and maintenance of equipment and so forth, and you're supposed to comment on that in the report, which I think it should do. And here's going to give you a bigger tool there to say, all right, you have to have this O&M manual, and that's what you're going to address when you do the inspection every however many years. And then every so often we'll ask you to go ahead into that manual, review the contents of it, and decide if that thing is still relevant, appropriate, does it need updating, and then you comment on that on the manual itself every so many cycles, or maybe every other cycle. But otherwise, every report cycle, you're going to have to look at that manual and see what are they supposed to be doing, and then then that's the basis of my inspection. So that's really what I think, what I'm suggesting should happen here instead of an operator permit.
Gotcha. Okay. And that I understand. And, you know, from a technical standpoint, I'll say I'm certainly in agreement with that. Just to provide context, or so you guys have an understanding of maybe of what some of the other groups are looking at as well. I can't remember which group it is. It might be the legislative group.
That is.
They're actually looking at developing a requirement for, I think it's basically licensure of dams, in which there's, you know, obviously a requirement to show that they have the capability of properly operating and maintaining them. And in addition to that, proof of financial responsibility for owning and operating a dam. And so, you know, maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but I kind of feel like that's maybe part of the impetus or the push from ASTSO for this recommendation.
Well, if you're going to have a license, then I don't know. I mean, the question still comes up in my mind, you know, okay, if my driver's license expires, you take it away and I can't drive anymore, right? But if you take away my license to operate my dam, I still got the dam. I can't just make it go away. So it doesn't, in that sense, what does it really do to have a permit there? Because the dam is still there. It still has to do the same things. To me, it seems like what you really, you know, want is to be able to assess fines, and you know, the fine is the input, or is going to be the motivating factor there. But you know, this is my opinion on it. But you know, if they're gonna implement this license, does the permit go together with the license then, or is it instead of the license, or the license instead of the permit? I mean,
You
Yeah, I
think
don't know.
that would be that would be in lieu of a O&M permit. I don't see why you need an O&M permit and a license.
In the other group, they just changed the word permit to license because they were viewing a licensing structure rather than a permit that would be issued by the department. So basically, same concept, but it would be an ongoing licensing with the demonstration of financial capabilities like Dan had talked about. But this is a little bit. I think that the same thing along those lines. If you wanted to swap, you know, permit for license, you know, here that would be, you'd be thinking along the same lines as the other group.
yeah.
Or if, you know, the other thought too is if you know, we still wanted to look at, you know, review of operation and maintenance plans as Paul has presented, you know, that's certainly not a bad recommendation, but, you know, we would take the recommendation of permitting and defer to the other group for licensure.
Yeah, that's not a bad suggestion. I think it's a good suggestion to have a requirement for O&M because Paul is right. There is no current requirement by the statute or rule that a dam owner develop or update or provide any type of O&M plans.
I think that's kind of what our emails going back and forth were talking about, and I was agreeing originally that why create another process if we could roll it into inspections? But it sounds like if licensure is an avenue that folks are going to want to go, let's make it part of that. And I would imagine then that they would have to produce this O&M plan in order to get their license, and then be reviewed and updated on whatever period the license renewal is. Does that make sense?
Those folks are looking at licensing for more of like a financial assurance type of thing. Like, in order to own and operate a dam in the state of Michigan, you have to show that you can do that adequately.
Well,
part of that's O&M too.
It is a compliance aspect as well. They want to ensure that the dams are in compliance as you're going back through, you know, and trying to renew your licensure, you know, and if there's a pattern of non-compliance, that would be the point where they would address it through licensure.
But my point was, I wouldn't see any problem with breaking out the O&M piece of this recommendation and kind of putting it more in line with the inspection reports and EAPs, where every inspection cycle or annually or whatever it turns out to be, you're also updating and you know, your O&M plan and submitting an up-to-date copy to us to review. But like I said, that's up to the group, but I wouldn't have any strong objection to tying it to that more so than tying it to the licensing.
I feel like Glenn's got some comments.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think I'm in agreement with Luke on that, what he described.
You know, I guess my only thing would be, I think that should be in the statute. I mean, if it's a significant burden, you could say on the owner, therefore it should be in the statute, not just put into a rule, you know, telling them they got to come up with this manual. It doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be 100-page volume or anything. It could be just a few sheets for some dams, but yeah, so I don't know. I guess maybe, I don't know, Elizabeth, does this belong into the new recommendations section then? Because it is kind of getting far afield of this whole question of the permit. You know, if we're just going to simply say we're recommending that an O&M manual be required.
You know, I think as comparing it to 9C, it seems that it is different enough that it would be a new recommendation.
Yeah. And then we just either give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the 9C as it is.
Because 9C had a few different parts to it, it felt like to me the first piece about development of a permit period for dam construction permit, does that already exist?
Yeah.
Well, for construction, this, I think it was getting at having a separate time period within that for ongoing operation and maintenance.
Right. So that first piece about the construction time period, that's already taken care of. And it sounds like we're not saying that we need a permit that's part of the construction permit or a separate O&M. So would we be essentially rejecting this one, but creating a new one for the O&M piece, the license piece or manual?
That'd be my vote to reject 9C.
Yeah, I agree.
Makes sense.
And you're rejecting it, are you saying that we don't feel there should be any kind of permit or licensure, or are we saying that we're rejecting this one and deferring to the language under the legislative group?
Well, I mean, we are. I'm rejecting what's here. You know, is the permit part of it. If the licensure question comes to me, then I'll comment on that separately, I guess. But I'm just going to say I don't want to push it to that legislative part, because we're dealing with legislation here too. You know, so I don't know. I would just. And my vote would be to reject it as it is, but I don't know what other people think about it.
I think all recommendations of all subgroups are going to come before the whole group pretty soon. So if, like I said, if you're going to reject it here and consider it elsewhere, I think then you're still covered, right? It's not being rejected outright at this point.
And I guess I'm fine rejecting this one, but I do like the idea of having some O&M accountability, whether it's through the license piece or whatever. I think that still needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I think we should still push forward with a new recommendation for the O&M as Paul had prescribed.
So I am going to find that new recommendations form so that we can work through that process here in a bit. Okay, so I am noting that for 9C, that this group's recommendation is to reject that language as it pertains to the permit recommendation. And then to create a new recommendation. Let me just put this in here and then I'll do a screen share. Oops.
I mean, do we need to have a vote on this? You know, I've been the most opening my mouth the most on this one. I don't want to be assumed that everybody's on board with what I'm saying here, you know, so.
Oh, I did have a question about the box at the bottom of the document. It says, it mentions, let me see here, for potential for high hazard dams, but it does not mention anything about the lower hazard dams.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that was just my thought, is for high and significant hazard dams, but you know, I think as long as there's some flexibility, I don't know why you couldn't do one for a low hazard dam too. Like I said, these could be just a couple sheets of paper for some of these dams that just don't take a whole lot, you know.
And that'd be consistent with the 5-year inspection report for the low hazard dams.
Yeah, are we looking at the markups I made on that PDF 09C?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you could just say dams and get rid of the potential rating. Luke, I don't know, was that the thought, is moving towards an O&M for everybody?
Yeah. So yeah, I think a couple things. I would think an O&M plan for all dams, because even low hazard dams, there's big ones that have gates and a lot of components. They're just out in the middle of nowhere. They won't hurt anybody if they fail, right? So I would think, but you're right, absolutely right. The complexity of the plan is commensurate with the complexity of the dam, right? If it's smaller than an embankment with a riser pipe, it's checking for beaver debris and keeping an eye on it, right? And mowing it. But if it's something else, there's a lot more to it. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. And I would say too, you either tie it to the inspection or have them reviewed. And we like to use the term reviewed and updated as necessary. That could even be an annual, because the more they're looking at it and updating phone numbers, that's the part that we worry about if you go too long in between, is that you'll pick it up and you'll try to call somebody and you'll get a dial tone or, something like that. Busy. Right. Signal. But yeah, once it's developed, I would think it'd be fairly easy to update. So I wouldn't be opposed to a more tighter than that 5-year for the lows.
Yeah, I mean, those times I honestly were fairly arbitrary on my point, the intervals between the inspections. I don't know that we're necessarily putting that markup document forward here at all. I mean, that's just for the group to look at, to kind of think about this. I think all we're going to do is have one little block of text for our recommendation in the new business, aren't we, Elizabeth?
For this meeting, or do you mean for the recommendations from the task force?
From the task force, the new recommendations, I think it's just going to be one little block of text like you've got in column C for the existing ones.
Well, one of the, if I'm understanding your question or your point, one of the things that has been talked about, I know with some of the other task force members, is trying to, especially if it's something going before the legislature, trying to have some language crafted that would provide the wishes of the task force as they've been discussed, and gives the legislature something to work with and respond to, as opposed to crafting it on their own.
Okay.
Which might not yield the results that the task force wishes.
All right. Well, to move along, I guess I'll motion that we reject 09C.
Thanks, Paul.
I'll second it if you're doing the Roberts.
Okay.
Is it
Or
important to offer some clarity as to why the recommendation is to reject, or do we just need to just say reject there?
It would be helpful.
Yeah.
Sure. So recommendation is to reject this because it's being covered elsewhere, and then introduce a new one that's only covering O&M, right? So maybe something as simple as that, Elizabeth, in the notes is
Mhm.
being covered elsewhere, the licensing structure being covered elsewhere. New recommendation from this group is to make an O&M requirement.
Oh, I'm okay with that.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Thanks. So based on that, do we have all ayes from this group? No nays? All right. Good. Then let me just make sure I've captured that. And then if it would be helpful here, why don't I do a screen share next of our new recommendations form. Let's see. All right. So this is another table that is new recommendations. And I just copied and paste. So just the notes that I had from our earlier conversation, but this isn't worded as a recommendation at this point. Ken, the subgroup that worked on this, did you have draft recommendation language for this, or we're crafting it now?
I don't recall there necessarily being specific language about the O&M requirements.
Okay.
Or an O&M plan, I should say. But you know, I think we'd say it would be broadly covered under, you know, their compliance requirements under licensure. I think this is specifically looking at providing statutory requirements for O&M manuals.
I think, Paul, you're muted if you're talking to us.
Sorry. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Agreeing with Dan. Yeah. All we're doing here is just wanting to get explicit requirement of an O&M manual in the statute. And then what I was going to say, Elizabeth, what I could do is revise that PDF that I had sent on 09C and just call it a new recommendation, and then change the text in there a little bit to make it a little more open as far as because I think one of the comments I heard back was we want it to apply to all the dams, not just significant and high, and then maybe open up the language a little bit as far as the cycle. So I could pass that, and maybe that just goes to the whole group, and then we could forward that on in the big meeting.
That works for me. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay.
Rationale, can fill that in. Task force recommendation. I would assume that at this point, so task force recommendation, that's adopt or reject or revise. So I guess we'll hold off on that until there's some language put together. Does that make sense? Okay. And okay. We'll get back to that later. Yes.
As for the rationale, maybe we want to just mention that it's in replacement or in lieu of the 9C or whatever. I mean, just tying it back to, you know, what was being rejected.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
can always revise that, but just as a placeholder. Great, good progress. What time we have? About 11 or 12:17. So I think, according to my notes, that would be, I will stop screen sharing. Since that's the one new recommendation from this subgroup, we will work on putting together some language on that recommendation. You've handled all of the other permitting and design review recommendations from ASDSO. And so congratulations. Pause there and well done, everybody. And then as far as what was left on our agenda, we've got our next steps as far as assignments that mostly are for Paul and me, I believe. And we will, I'll send out communications to the group prior to the meeting on the 30th. But just going back to, what we're trying to do for the next full task force meeting is to have those high level recaps of what's happened in the subgroup. And whichever one of you is willing to serve as the spokesperson, I can just communicate with you about the few key questions that we just want to make sure get addressed by each of the groups. And it's really a matter, what we're talking about now is, how many recommendations did you consider? How many were adopted? Were any rejected? What were some of the main issues, topics that the group spent, a fair amount of time discussing? So just to give a flavor to the other subgroups, what happened. So with that framing, are any of you interested in stepping forward to give that overview at the meeting on the 30th?
I think Paul's pretty well versed in all of this.
Yeah, Paul, would you be willing?
Yeah, I'll be willing to do that.
Got our support.
Thank you.
I like that. It was a defensive move. Glenn said, I don't want to do it, so I'm going to volunteer somebody.
Thanks, Paul. Okay. Let's see, are there any other items to discuss, either from our task force members or the Eagle staff who are on this meeting?
I just had a quick question, and it doesn't even need to be answered, but I was curious from all Eagle staff if they liked what came out of this subgroup, and if there was any, I don't know, any red flags in particular or any concerns. I mean, I feel like you voiced everything and were integral as we went through all of this, but is there anything unresolved in your mind? Did we miss anything? Did we not address something that's?
No, I think this group did a really good job of getting through the recommendations they had, and parsing it down to, good, well-founded recommendations moving forward. I think, the only outstanding item that's going to be a discussion really for the larger group is that 9C, which, I can't get my spreadsheet to go to it, which, we basically have rejected because it's been addressed by another group. So ultimately this team is also going to need to look at that and provide their feedback to the larger group, because, this concept of licensure, permitting, or whatever you want to, whatever is ultimately decided for operation of a dam is going to be a big decision point, in this whole process. And so that's the only outstanding item, but I think the approach you guys took for deferring it, given, and I can say the other group has put a lot of legwork into it. So I think given the level of effort they put into that one, I think it's appropriate, the approach you guys took.
Thank you.
Well, I guess when it comes into the big group, I mean, are we going to have any opportunity to discuss that part of it then, the license? the appropriateness of it. I guess I want to see what they come up with, but I'm not sure I'm on board with a license.
Well, you know, Dan, when you said it looked like I might have a lot to say, here I am as a dam owner, thinking about the licensing requirements and all these permitting and design requirements and all these, it will be all a significant effort, without a doubt. So I too am interested in the licensing discussion and what requirements and recommendations come out of that.
Yeah, one of as Eagle staff and our team of facilitators have been attending these, what will be 12 meetings of the subgroups, certain themes and more complicated topics are coming up. And it sounds like certainly financing, the licensure issue, there might be others, but they will require some more facilitated conversation during the full task force meetings. So we are aiming to set aside some time to start delving into those cross-cutting issues at the meeting on the 30th. And then also, I believe what we would hope for is to continue with some of that in December at that meeting.
Yeah, I'd say kind of just to break it down, the three general themes that come out, in a lot of the discussions is, one, what dams do we really want to have in the state? Two is, do we have good ownership of those dams? And three, do we have funding to, address the needs?
Okay, well, that's all of our business according to the agenda. So if there aren't any other questions or statements to share, then we can give everybody a few minutes of their afternoon back.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks everybody.
Okay.
See you after the holiday.